Hello and welcome to this online lecture. This lecture is going to cover what are called neutralization reactions. Neutralization reactions are the reactions that happen whenever you react an acid with a base. They're very predictable, and that's why they're named, because there's a very strong pattern. Whenever you react an acid with a base, you're going to always get the same two products. You're going to get water, and then you're going to get a salt. This will happen every time that you neutralize an acid with a base. So this is the general pattern. Make sure that you know it very well. I'm going to show you just a minute how the pattern applies to actual reactions. But before you move on, make sure you understand this. If you mix an acid with a base, if you react those two things, you're always going to produce water and some form of a salt. And in this instance, a salt is just going to be basically some kind of a metal with some kind of a nonmetal. So basically like an ionic substance. It's almost a synonym for that. Okay. So you might have to go back and look in your notes, or maybe go back and kind of listen to the lecture again about what makes an acid, and what makes a base, so that you can recognize those based on their formulas if you've forgotten them. Okay, on with the example. Let's take the acid, let's take hydrochloric acid and react it with sodium hydroxide. This is a binary acid. It's a nonmetal with a hydrogen. And this is a metal, one of the first two group element metals with hydroxide. So we know that these are an acid and a base. So the first step here is to identify the acid and to identify the base. In this reaction, like I just said, hydrogen chloride is the acid and NaOH is the base. Now, why do you always get water and a salt? Here is why. Basically, these are double replacement, double displacement reactions. This hydrogen is going to take the place of this sodium. So the hydrogen is going to take the place of the metal. And then look at what you're going to get. You're going to have a hydrogen from the acid. You're going to have the OH from the base. Well, what is that? There's two H's and an O. That's H2O. So that's where the water comes from. It's the acid taking the place of the metal and creating water. And so what's left over? You've got the sodium from the base, and you have the chloride from the acid. And so you get the ionic compound sodium chloride, which is a salt. It's a metal with a nonmetal. We call those a salt. So that's your first example. HCl plus NaOH creates H2O and NaCl. And so that's the general pattern. It's the hydrogen taking the place of the metal and creating water, and the metal joining with the nonmetal to make a salt. They're not always quite this simple. Let's look at a little bit more, slightly more complicated one. Let's say I had H2SO4, and that's sulfuric acid. And let's say I reacted that with LiOH, that's lithium hydroxide. What are you going to make? Well, even though it says H2 right here, the hydrogens are still going to bond with the hydroxides to make water. It's always going to be water. And now this time we have lithium. The lithium's left over, and it's going to combine with the sulfur. But sulfur, you have to remember how to create and write the correct formula. Lithium is +1, and sulfate is -2. So you actually have to have two lithiums. You still have to do all of this stuff that you learned in the first semester. It doesn't go away. And you'll notice that this isn't balanced. There's not the same number of these things on both sides. So sometimes you have to balance these neutralization reactions as well. So now we have 4 hydrogens, only 2 hydrogens here, and then if I put a 2 right there, it balances it out. Neutralization reactions can happen between all forms of acids and all forms of bases. If I had the acid acetic acid, CH3COOH, it's one of those carboxylic acids because it's got the COOH. Let's say we react that with sodium hydroxide. It's going to make water. The water, again, comes from the H. Now this time, the H that's part of the acid is this H right here on the end. It's the H that's on the COO part that creates the acid. So that's the one that's going to be combining with the hydroxide to make the water. And then what do you have left? You've got Na from the base, and you have CH3COO from the acid. And so you get a compound that's NaCH3COO. And this salt's name is sodium acetate. But that's basically what happens. You can see it's the same pattern every time. The hydrogen, no matter how many they are, the hydrogen or the hydrogens from the acid are going to combine with the hydroxide from the base, and those things make water. It happens that way every time. And then whatever's left over is going to combine to make an ionic substance. So this is it for neutralization reactions. Really important that you write the formulas correctly, that you're making sure the total charge of your formulas is 0. And it's important to acknowledge sometimes you're going to have to balance these reactions as well. So that's it for this online lecture. Thanks for watching. As always, if you have any questions, feel free to ask them in class.